Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Bolton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, how you doing, everybody? It is Monday. Again. This is it. We've done it again. Monday, June 8th, 2020. And time for yet another show. I was getting ready to turn on the microphones this morning, and for whatever reason, just clearing up the old throat here and trying to evict the frog, even though evictions are forbidden, I think, until the beginning of next month maybe in our state. I don't know. I'll check it out. I got to get rid of this deadbeat frog anyway. Just doing the regular clearing of the throat, and for some reason it came out like it just reminded me of the old Fat Albert cartoons for some reason, which I guess are, well, one thing passe, and two, I guess are they on the outs now because they had something to do with Bill Cosby? Are we not allowed to reference those anymore, or at least not without expressing some remorse about that, I guess? All right, let's see. Lots to catch up on this Monday morning. Greg Dworkin, Commandante Greg Dworkin, we'll call him now that he is commanding battalions of Antifa and terrorizing small-town America by not showing up at all with buses full of super soldiers, etc. Lots happening on his front. We'll catch up with all the stories. Another wild weekend of protest. I think things have simmered down a little bit in terms of confrontations, but still lots of hot pockets, if you will, of trouble where police overreact, where bystanders are now overreacting and jumping into the fray, as I think has long been expected. But for the most part, a weekend of peaceful protest in many places, and in many places around the world. One of the aspects that you've probably noted, but that we have not yet, I don't think, discussed on the show, is the the worldwide reaction to the protest movement here. And no surprise, but it's a little bit of a surprise in that they're paying that much attention to what's going on in American streets. But America has made itself a spectacle for a long time, and people do pay attention to American domestic politics in the ways that we do not pay attention to the domestic politics even of our immediate neighbors. Thanks very much for all the attention. I guess we love it. And but no surprise that there should be similar reactions elsewhere, because systemic racism has been a problem around the world. It started as a global problem and is today reflected as a global problem, as I saw in particular lots of discussion of activities. The discussion was taking place yesterday. I don't know whether the activities were Saturday or Sunday activities, but in Bristol, over in jolly old England, a little jollier than it was, I guess, last week, as residents in Bristol tore down a local statue. We'll get you the name and all the information soon enough. Let's see. I've got too many things in pocket for here to present itself immediately. I believe it was Edward, do I have the right name? Edward Coulson? Was that right? The name of a local historical figure of note who was, I guess, a member of Parliament for Bristol at one point. A local, to put it euphemistically, merchant. I mean, he sold a lot of things, but the one that got him in trouble because it was so horrific and wrong was, of course, slave trading. This is a guy who was alive, born in the 1600s, and I guess a major trader in the late 1600s, early 1700s. Not certain when he began this relative to his service in Parliament, but memorialized in a statue in late 1800s. Many years, I guess hundreds of years after his death, but memorialized because he ended his life as a great philanthropist. We don't know how great he really was, though, because, of course, he was giving away an enormous fortune, at least part of which was made in the slave trade, and perhaps the bulk of which, and I think even the rest of the trading he did was very much slave dependent, both in that he was trading in sugar products which were, of course, very much slave dependent, and because the capital probably was only available to him to work in these other areas because he had cleared such a huge profit on the slave trade. So anyway, long story short, he's a slave trader, and he's remembered that way by the current residents of Bristol for the most part. Yes, apparently funded some very important philanthropic projects, hospitals, schools, etc. And I guess that's what made his statue, that's what saved it by giving it controversial status as opposed to anathema status, I guess. Anyway, the residents of Bristol bypassed a long-running debate, finally, over what to do with this statue and tore it down and rolled it. It's a big bronze statue. Rolled it through the streets. It wasn't very fast. It's a difficult thing to roll through the streets, not cylindrical. And dumped it in the harbor, the river harbor there, as many observers have pointed out, the very harbor in which he would have docked his slave ships, and so dumping it in the water there cause for celebration among many in Bristol. Some were worried about preserving their heritage, but apparently the name will be preserved through, I guess they'll keep the name on some of the philanthropic projects that he funded. Maybe not. I don't know. We'll see how that one develops. But I saw that there. I saw also in Belgium, where I wasn't expecting quite this reaction, but then again, once I saw it, I said, hey, why not? It's good timing for it. It makes a lot of sense. I guess Congolese immigrants and people of Congolese descent climbing the statue of King Leopold. Is he Leopold III? I'll have to look that up. The king of he's dead, so we'll say former king of Belgium, who was responsible for the colonization of Congo, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, and they climbed up on a statue with the Democratic Republic of Congo's flag, chanting and protesting and calling the king, I think pretty accurately, chanting murderer. They did not pull down the statue. I don't know how difficult it would be to pull down one of those. That one looks like a pretty substantial piece, but a lot of good reminders that this was started as a global problem, and I guess I hope that when it ends globally too. It was really interesting to see that, plus all the less exciting but equally uplifting marches all around the world, in major cities everywhere, and very little in the way of police rioting there, so showing the way for us to go forward, and maybe some new policing models as well. We got to talk about what people want to see or say they want to see, and what Republicans say Democrats want to see based on a misinterpretation of what Democrats say when they say what they want to see. Well, here's Greg Dworkin. I think he can straighten all of that out. Good morning, Commandante. Thank you for not raiding the countryside this morning and coming by to speak with us on a rational basis.
Well, good morning. There's a lot going on here. The Edward Coulson story was especially funny because when they pulled the statue down, it was too heavy to carry, so they rolled him over to the harbor and then tossed him in. And Michael DeAtter, the Canadian cartoonist, said, if the police ask, he tripped.
Yeah, I saw there's a great thread out there of like, that statue was no angel. The guy had an
obvious pre-existing condition, so you can't blame it on the protesters.
Right. They found weapons on him, all kinds of great stuff.
That sort of thing. But yeah, a lot going on. In Newtown, Connecticut, we had, with very brief warning, like I saw it on social media a couple hours before it happened, but yesterday was a Black Lives Matter protest in our small town. And we have, it's about, 32,000 people that live here. And 1,500 showed up on short notice for this 20-minute masked, everybody wore a mask, outdoor, take a knee for 8 minutes. And I have to tell you that when you get to a certain age, 8 minutes is forever. If it's your life, 8 minutes is forever.
Right.
But going down on your knee for 8 minutes is really difficult.
Can be.
But I saw a picture of a Utah Marine in uniform on his knee for hours.
Oh?
Hours. in the Utah sun to the point where he didn't move. You know how they stand at Arlington National Cemetery and don't move?
Yes.
Marines are great at that. He was in place so long, his shoe soles melted into the pavement.
That's not good. I mean, for shoes.
I can't do that. I couldn't even quite do it for 8 minutes, although I came close.
Pretty hot, I guess.
And so, the point is USA Today has this map showing that these protests are all over the country, large towns and small.
Yes.
They were happening in small towns in Texas.
Rural and urban, that too.
Rural and urban. Was it Vidor, Texas?
I don't know.
Which is known as one of the most hateful places in the country. The Three Billboards movie?
Yeah, right, yes.
This was the town where that actually came from in real life.
Oh, they moved the town in the movies, I guess.
Yeah,
okay.
They moved the town in the movie. But, I mean, for it to happen there, people from the area tell me, is just incredibly remarkable. Just phenomenal.
I saw a lot of great photos. I have Marshall County, Kentucky, a small, tiny place, and heavily white, like 98% white.
So it's a thing, and of course polling comes out over the weekend showing that, it matters, that three-quarters of the country, anywhere between two-thirds and three-quarters of the country are siding with the protesters. There is no backlash against Democrats. There's no backlash against Biden. There's no help for Trump in this. And in fact, the polling that has come out is fairly brutal. I have it all rounded up in the pundit roundup, but just for grins, the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, which finished, I believe, on June 2nd, and so it's a week old, has Biden up by 7. Fox News has Biden up by 8, Quinnipiac by 11, Monmouth by 11, ABC, Washington Post by 10, and this morning CNN has Biden up by 14. Now, this represents, on average, according to Nate Cohen, between March 15th and April 15th, these polls had Biden up by 6.2, and as of today, they have him up by 10.2.
Okay.
So he's gained 3 or 4 points. And Nate adds, look, I understand why people are distrustful of the polls after what happened 4 years ago, but right now Biden would easily withstand another 2016-sized polling error. And there wasn't a polling error for the national popular vote, by the way, or a wide gap between the Electoral College and the nation as a whole. And the point there is if your lead is over 5, there's not going to be an electoral gap in the Electoral College versus the national poll. If your lead is greater than 5 nationally, you're winning. That's why he's tied in Texas, and that's why another poll came out from Michigan, also showing him up by large numbers. I think it was 11. But every way you look at it, Biden's winning and Trump is losing. His own campaign knows that. They're panicking. They're talking about how to reboot, whether he should give a national speech for unification. In other words, what he's doing isn't working, and they recognize it. And it's pretty amazing. Some other things that the NBC News poll highlighted, where Biden is growing, my conservative friend Josh Jordan points out, from Hillary's national vote in 2016 and where Trump is struggling. Hillary won women by 12. Biden is leading by 21.
Oh.
Trump won men by 12, and he's only leading by 8. And for the most part of interest is that in all of these polls, Trump's numbers remain static, like 41, 42, and Biden's keep growing. And so the implication there, and that doesn't mean it sticks, but the implication there is that what's happening is that all the I don't know, I'm not sure people are being pushed to Biden, which matches what we know about I hate them both polling, where Biden's winning that one by like 8-1. So Trump has his base. He's going to keep his base. It may not change, but everybody else, like all the sane people, are looking at this and saying, this isn't what I want. I would guess, and I would venture to say that photo op of him with the Bible and pushing people out of the way to get there, didn't work. At least not the way he intended.
Yeah. I did see Mitt Romney on the streets in Washington, D.C. He didn't have to gas or shoot anybody to get out there safely.
No, so that was a big deal. I mean, the two things that happened, the smaller one is that Colin Powell said, I can't support Trump, I'm voting for Biden.
Right.
And the bigger one is Mitt Romney
Okay.
out there marching and tweeting and taking selfies with the caption Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
I mean, that's just a phenomenal thing. Now, if you know anything about his dad,
Yes, some.
that's not phenomenal at all.
Oh. Well, but it's still nice.
His father
to
was
take
very
anything
much
away
into
from him.
racial
Give
equality
something
and
to
got
him here.
pilloried for it in his own
Yeah.
presidential run. So it runs in the family. I have no doubt
That's a good thing.
that Romney's not just sticking his finger up and trying to see which way the wind blows. This one, comes from where he's actually at. The problem is when he doesn't do that.
Yes.
The knock against Romney isn't that he's a decent person. It's that he's a decent person who allows the political winds to push him away from being decent. He didn't do that this time, and so he gets all the credit.
That's good. And he met us halfway on impeachment. That people are remembering that.
Vidor.
Vidor, yes.
Thank you. I ain't from Texas.
Mad Hatter tells
Y'all.
us. Okay, Vidor, right?
Vidor, but at least I got the town right.
Yes. Oh, and I have neglected to mention, as I see reminders also on Twitter, I guess the one place where the protest tensions escalated over the weekend, Seattle has continuing difficulty getting a handle on its police. I'm not certain what's happening there. Exactly.
You mean the police are not totally under control in the various cities and towns across the United States?
We do not have civilian control of the military.
Seattle was supposed to get
Seattle.
rid of their tear gas, but I guess they put it off for a day.
Well, they got rid of a part of it. Looks like, according to these pictures, anyway. I don't know how they were planning on disposing of the tear gas that they wanted to stop using, but one way is to vent it into the crowd, and it appears that they spent the good part of the weekend doing that, unless they just lit people on fire and the smoke is that rather than gas. I'm just watching the pictures roll by here.
Right. I have on my pundit roundup just Weck tweeting on the 6th of June, still thinking about how people were like, not all cops, and then literally all cops in Buffalo were like, no, it's all of us.
Yeah. Well, yeah, right. Blocks of 50 of us at a time, anyway.
So that's important because today congressional Democrats are unveiling police reform packages. Or if it's not today, it's certainly this week. The House will do it. And in the Senate, I think that that will also be brought up by people like Kamala Harris and Cory Booker, who, by the way, are still arguing with Rand Paul about whether an anti-lynching law ought to go forward. So, in other words, the Republicans are doing everything they possibly can to try to convince people that what we said about them is actually true, every bit of it. What we said about Trump is true, and what we said about them supporting Trump is true. They really are racist, and they have no concerns whatsoever for the majority of the country.
Guess not.
They're trying to prove it. I don't understand it. It's crazy, but hey, there they are doing it.
Yeah, well, they were brought up to believe that they could get away with it.
And I think this is important, too. The police reform package that people are trying to push in Congress, it's not only important for the subject content, but because, note, it's being pushed by Democrats. Republicans have nothing to suggest or offer at all.
On
Zero.
any subject. We're going to have beautiful health care reform. We can't really think of what it's going to be.
They built a fence around the White House. That's the only positive thing that they've done. And now everybody's putting pictures and memorials on it. And so it's become a museum, an art gallery at taxpayer expense, while amazing. Trump cowers behind it. And, of course, everybody pulled out the old Doonesbury cartoons from the Nixon era where there was just a wall being built in front of the White House walling everybody off. Yeah. We know how this ends. I mean, this isn't a mystery. Right.
I actually had to spend some time yesterday when a photo went around of the fencing with concertina razor wire on the top, and I actually had to spend some time saying, now, wait a second. I believe that he might have put that up there, but that does look like it's photoshopped, and I had to spend time trying to figure out, is there razor wire on top of the fence at the White House or not? Is he crazy enough to do that? I don't believe that there is, although I didn't see anything definitive about it. I also saw no
How else are you going to keep him from climbing it?
I don't know. Just say,
if you're going to have to pen him in, you're going to have to use razor wire.
Yeah, I guess
just
so.
Common sense.
Right. Yeah, just make sure
that's why they did that, right? To keep Trump in the White House. So
the gun turrets face inward. I don't really understand that idea with fortifying. You would think that they'd be smart enough not to do that, and it doesn't look like they did. But it took time, and I had to puzzle this through and say, is he crazy enough to put? I mean, he would think it would look tough and decisive.
Yep.
Whereas everybody else would think it would look cowardly, fearful, ridiculous, and dictatorial. So maybe it's real, and I had to look
Maybe
around.
it's real. Oliver Willis
not,
tweets, it's 5 months until the election, and it isn't close to 1. The takeaway is to stop being scared and risk-averse all the time and stand up or kneel for what's right and let the chips fall.
Okay.
All right? So stop cowering. Biden is ahead. Just say it. Well, 5 months. There's 148 days before the election, and it's not even that. It's 100 days because early voting starts in 100 days.
Oh. All right. I'll vote early.
At least in some places. So, it gets late early in these parts.
Yeah? Hey, what?
It's Yogi.
Okay. Yeah, all right.
Yogi said
There we
that, so
go.
it must be true.
Yeah. I guess so. All right, that makes more sense. I was like, wait a second. What did he? Oh, he must be one of those Yogi Berra things. It is. All right.
It is.
Yes.
So, don't tell me that, it's 6 months. It's not 6 months. It's 5 months. In fact, it's only 100 days.
We have to nominate
That's like
these guys
practically
first.
3 months. So the election's coming, and Trump is losing. And the thing is, when you are over 50% in the polls, which is where Biden is sitting right now,
Yeah.
that means that the people who have decided against you, if you're Donald Trump, are not coming back.
I don't think that there's much he can do to make people say,
Your job is
100,000
to
dead.
get the people who haven't decided to go your way, and that's why the James Comey 11 days before the election crap was so important. But if you already have more than 50% of the population deciding that they don't want you, they're not coming back.
Yes.
In fact, in the CNN national poll,
no.
Biden's at 55. Now, sure, that's probably too high, and there's a variety of technical reasons for that,
Why it's too high?
why it's too high.
Okay.
But it's a lead. I mean, Nate Cohn is right. Everybody else is looking at this
It
as
is
correct.
that. I don't see how else you could characterize it.
Right? He's leading. Just accept it.
Okay. Well, that's good. Yeah, there's a lot of hand-wringing over the weekend because that's what people do, and for
Right.
various reasons. But, yeah, certainly the one that says, don't say he's ahead, we might jinx it.
Yeah,
It's
we
like-
got to be 72 points behind. Otherwise, we can't, come on.
All
Drop
right.
that stuff.
Yeah.
Internal campaign surveys and public polling showed a steady erosion in support for Trump among seniors and in battleground states once believed to be leaning decisively to the president's direction, including Georgia, Arizona, and Ohio, writes Jonathan Lemire for AP this morning.
Okay.
Virus and racial unrest forced Trump campaign to recalibrate. They don't know what to do. They're actually meeting trying to decide what their new message is. They're trying to rebrand him.
Oh.
3 months, 4 months, 5 months before an election. And there's two big problems for that. Trump doesn't want to be rebranded.
That's one thing.
And the other is he can't be rebranded.
Aha. Didn't they do an autopsy once that they could use?
The next one is going to be interesting. And so what's
If it's
happening
Trump,
with a
it
lot
will
of
be.
this, Republicans are deciding to double and triple and quadruple bound down.
Can you do that?
And they're doing some incredibly violent ads. I don't know if you've seen this. I'm going to send this to you.
No.
This is Jerry Taylor over at the Niskanen Center, who is saving some of these things, but they're pretty bad. This is Marjorie Greene, Save America, Stop Socialism, and she shows up with it looks like an AR-15, or maybe it's an AK-47, or I don't know what gun it is, and therefore I'm not entitled to talk about it.
Right. It's a clip, though.
Yeah. Well, here's a clip of a clip.
Oh, okay.
So he's got a number of these. Let's see what else he's got here. He's got Bob Hamilton in Kansas along the same lines.
There's the gun.
And
It's
he's
an
starting to
AR-15.
compile them.
Okay.
And he says a civil society is not one where political candidates threaten to murder those who argue for policies they disagree with. Believing in gun control and voting for the same is not a killing offense, nor is signing up to join an organization dedicated to fighting fascism.
And you don't even have to sign up. There's no sign-in sheet as far as I know.
Right?
They don't take attendance
So,
or anything.
he points out the majority of Antifa would not
gonna go
appear
with
to
that?
be terrorists.
Okay.
And, the whole idea is crazy, but, that's where they're going.
Yeah.
Now, one of the reasons, and people are pointing out this, is that there is such a thing called differential non-response with polls, That means if you're really depressed about how your side is doing, you won't answer the phone when the pollster calls.
Okay.
It's the same thing that makes you not want to read the news after your team lost.
Yes, right.
You know, but when your team wins, you want to read the other city's newspaper.
Yeah, okay.
It happens all the time with the Yankees Red Sox. You know, when the Yankees beat the Red Sox, I want to read the Boston Globe.
Okay, right.
I want to rub it in their nose. I want to see how they're doing. I want the shade in front. But the opposite is true when the Yankees lose to the Red Sox. I don't want to read it. So a pollster calls and you're really depressed about how things are going. You don't want to pick up the phone and answer.
Yeah.
So that differential non-response is going to take away numbers from Trump and make the gap seem bigger than it is. But the very fact that that's happening is telling you something. They think they're losing is what it's telling you.
All right. Okay, I was going to say, you better tell me what do I think it means? Ah, yes.
That's why I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here to tell you what you should think.
Got it. That makes it a lot easier. Can
Right?
you come earlier
I'll be
tomorrow?
wrong, and you'll tell me I'm wrong, and that's the whole point, because I'm not a Republican.
Okay. All right. We can do
But,
that.
you know, what I'm saying is, you know, don't give me a hard time about this, but I think Joe Biden's ahead right now.
That's what it appears to be. All right. Well, I see.
Not necessarily in Vidor,
Right. That could be true. It could be backwards in
But
Vidor,
Texas
we'll
is
give
tied,
you a
according
chance
to the
to say
polls.
so.
and what does that tell you?
All right.
If Ohio is tied and Texas is tied, he's losing.
Yes, I would have to guess that would be that's where I would come down on that one.
Okay. Monkey Cage, which is political science in Washington Post, notes the Floyd protests are the broadest in U.S. history and are spreading to white small-town America. I'll leave you with that, and we'll talk about it after the break.
Okay, that's a good way to do it. We'll be back in 2 minutes. We'll regroup, figure out our path ahead. There's so many different directions we could go in. I'll go in the one that you bring us. That makes it easy for me, puts all the onus on you, just the way
That's why I'm here.
Okay. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. I can't read anything, apparently, now on Twitter. Did Twitter become new again?
Well, they put out a notice that if you put Good Twitter or one of those extensions on your browser to make it look the way it used to, they were going to deactivate that.
I see.
And so they did. And so now it looks like the new way that I hate, but you got to get used to. And when you try to embed some of those new fangled looking tweets and things like Skype, which is how David and I communicate during the show, it doesn't show up in a way that you could read it. It lists the tweet, but you can't read the tweet.
Oh, yeah, that's no good.
So it makes it, doubly difficult to communicate. Finishing up on polling, this is new and different polling. Polling conducted for the DNC released Monday, so it's internal polling. Okay. Take that with a grain of salt, but it found that 56% of voters in half a dozen battleground states,
Battlespace, we'll call them.
Battlespace states, believe that Trump's response to the coronavirus threat cost lives and jobs, and 44% said he took swift and decisive action that's protected lives and jobs. Now, presumably, the swift and decisive action, the only possible thing that they can be referring to is closing the border with China, which he didn't really do, but that's the only thing that would fit in that category, and Trump keeps telling us that he took swift and decisive action that everybody told him not to do, but he did anyway because he's smarter than everybody else. So that's got to be what the 44 think, and they probably hear it on Fox News. Remember, these are battleground polls.
Yeah. Well, that's bad news for him.
In the battlegrounds, he's losing the argument. He's lost the argument. He's lost the thread. He's lost the narrative. And that's why the polls are showing up the way they are. Whatever the Biden lead, the more important underlying thing is people are fully cognizant of the idea. They understand that coronavirus isn't done, and that a lot of people dying is a bad thing, and that the economy isn't turned around, regardless of what the numbers show or showed on Friday, and that race relations are terrible, and Trump is really bad at that. People understand those underlying things, and because all three of those things are really important, it puts Trump in a position to lose. So that's what's going on here. And the fact that in the battleground states, people understand that Trump's response to the coronavirus costs lives is also going to cost them the election. The lives are more important, but the election follows from that.
Yes.
In the poll, voters gave poor marks on a range of economic metrics, with 88% saying the unemployment rate was not so good or poor, and 70% saying that the national economy is not so good or poor. And 1/3 surveyed said somebody in their household had lost a job because of the pandemic. And more than 1/3 of those people in other polls know somebody who has the virus. So you can't hide it. You can't message your way around it or brand your way around it. That's just not going to happen.
I guess not. That does seem like a tall order to just say.
That's like, we're in the middle of a depression, but if you don't call it a depression and call it happy times,
it's an
then everything's
impression.
fine.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how they get around this. And although a lot of people's eyes have come off of the coronavirus ball a little bit.
Well, they're concentrating on other things, but it's not like they don't know it. It's in the back of everybody's mind. I was at a Black Lives Matter protest yesterday. Everybody was wearing masks.
Yeah.
It's not like it went away.
They kind of go, and it goes hand in hand. There was a lot of times when people wanted to go to their protests masked, and this is a good excuse, but it actually keeps it very much in mind. So, if you're going to be out in a crowd like that, by all means, mask up. Do your best. I mean, you can't just stay home in the face of all this. We understand.
So I'm told that John Bolton plans to publish a tell-all in June.
Oh, really?
Mark Zay, the lawyer,
June,
says, I've handled more pre-publication review cases than anybody. If government deems even one word classified, John Bolton can be prosecuted. Regardless,
awesome.
Failure to obtain approval subjects him to civil liability, and he should be sued and lose his advance and any royalties. So no special treatment for John Bolton. The book is over 500 pages, and people are trying to figure out what the heck can be in those 500 pages. I mean, certainly, who is it? Dan Dresner said, here's what's going to happen. Bolton's going to explain to you he's smarter than everybody else, and he tried to convince people to agree with him, and he was not completely successful.
Right.
And chapter 2 is here it again. And maybe there's like 5 chapters on his mustache.
That could be. I think you could probably take the top 10 chapters right off the top, and nobody would be able to tell the difference.
Yeah, pretty much. So,
the Secretariat.
That's not the news that it could have been. And again, people are noting he could have been a contender. He could have taken that moment and actually been
Laden.
Somebody like Mitt Romney would go.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I mean, he could have. He certainly. I wonder if people even remember it at the time. By the time he publishes this book, people will be like, oh, thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah, nobody's going to read it.
Not 500 pages of it anyway. I'll definitely leave that to the... Where's my crew of I read it so you don't have to, people? I need you on this one. You can split it up among you if you want. 500 pages is a lot. Probably going to get longer. There's no editor in this book?
Right. So anyway, the Floyd protests are the broadest in U.S. history, spreading to white, small-town America. The scale of the protests is unprecedented. 2 of the authors of this piece have been gathering data on protests across the country, and the other studies political mobilization in Pennsylvania. And the preliminary data shows that far more places have held protests already than held women's marches in January 2017. And that march occurred in 650 locations, and that had more participants than any other single-day demonstration in U.S. history. This time, few people had time for advanced planning, like what happened with us yesterday, amid a pandemic that has kept many Americans out of public spaces, and so the breadth of the protests is significant. All 50 states and D.C., including hundreds of smaller, lesser-known towns and cities that have not been in the spotlight during previous nationwide protests, like Fairmont, West Virginia, Lynn, Massachusetts, help me with pronunciation, Havre, Montana?
Havre. I guess that's
right? It's probably pronounced Hevro. I mean, and I just don't know it. But, you know.
Hickenlooper. Yeah, Havre, I guess, is that French?
And it's not just Houston
harbor?
Street, New York.
They have a harbor in Montana? Yeah, I guess. We have a Havre in Maryland.
There you go. Some cities are seeing numerous protests a day. Well, there's also a Houston in Texas, I'm told.
Houston.
Some cities, well, it's Houston Street,
yes,
New York.
That's right.
Some cities are seeing numerous protests a day, protests on numerous days, or both, as you can see in this article, and events in Palo Alto, or this Twitter account in New York City.
Alto.
Pittsburgh, not even one of the 60 largest U.S. cities, has seen at least one march, prayer, vigil, or silent protest every day since Friday, drawing anywhere from hundreds of thousands of people. The U.S. rarely has protests this combination of size, intensity, and frequency. It usually is big protests or sustained protests, but not both. Al Sharpton, as you may remember, is going to try to get a really big march going on Washington, but these things are happening anyway. Even in my small town, the 1,500 people, the 1,000 people that showed up yesterday, was actually a combination of two separate protests that joined together.
Hey, that's good. Yeah, nobody needs to claim the local franchise. People start a protest and then find out somebody else is doing it.
I went to the one where you were going to kneel by the flagpole for 8 minutes, and we were joined by the march that started at City Hall to the flagpole. So they all got together, there? And we all kneeled.
If you had a choice, which one would you start at? You start walking and then kneel, or did everybody kneel anyway?
Well, I just wanted to kneel because I just wanted to get in and out. You know, I'm still worried about the pandemic. I'm still wearing a mask, and so I just wanted to be short and sweet and make the point and then go home.
Yeah. Well, I don't blame you. There is
It's easier to show social distance with a kneeling thing where you can spread out than it is with a march.
Pick a spot. And, right.
So that's the one I picked.
Okay.
But hey, it all came together. It happened. Then we all left.
All right. Well, that's...
Now, Black Lives Matter protests have even emerged in smaller and whiter suburbs and towns in deeply conservative counties, including Chambersburg, Carlisle, Meadville, Waynesboro, Lock Haven, Carbondale, where the gopher is, right? Where the groundhog. And 2 dozen similar locales. I don't know what Phil was doing.
Kneeling, I assume.
Participants reflect the demographics of young people in these communities as a whole, small numbers of black students with lots of teenage allies, plus older supporters.
Yes.
While the young black protest leaders in Pennsylvania's mid-sized cities have often been organizing against police abuses and racism for years, some of the young organizers of small-town protests describe this as their first time organizing anything. The one in Louisville, like 6 black teenagers got together and did this.
All right. That's perfect.
This is compatible with evidence that young people in outer suburbs and small towns are becoming less conservative. Indeed, statistical analysis suggests that rural voters 18 to 29 went from supporting Trump by 17 to supporting Democratic congressional candidates by an 8-point margin in 2018, while the votes of their neighbors in their 40s and older barely budged. Again, making Rachel Bidekoffer's point, you don't change people's minds, you recruit new people into the equation.
Okay. Well,
right.
Growing up.
Even the very smallest cities, which tend to have more educated, more diverse, and younger populations than the surrounding regions, have shifted leftward in recent years, while the surrounding regions have often shifted rightward. And that's what's happening in places like Michigan, where the red places are getting redder, but the blue places are getting bluer, and that's where the population is.
Yes.
So that's going to shape our politics and the election, just so you know. And all of that is going on. So, again, pandemic. There is a pandemic going on. Ashish Jha writes, there are 5 truisms of public health, racism, and COVID-19. 1, mass gatherings spread virus.
True.
2, being outside helps. Well, we don't know how much.
Maybe.
3, wearing masks helps. Maybe a lot.
Seems to be the case, yes.
4, racism kills.
Right.
5, a destroyed economy kills.
True also. Yeah.
So, everybody has to balance those things. My 4 key public health messages I've tried to adhere to, says Dr. Shah. 1, never downplay horrible costs of being shut down. Number 2, focus on what needs doing, an effective government response to the pandemic. We don't have that, by the way. We still lack adequate testing, tracing, so we can suppress virus, get our lives back. That's why the curve has been flat, or if anything, growing in the country right now. Number 3, as we open up, we should avoid things that are truly discretionary, like pool parties and large indoor gatherings. And number 4, We should never begrudge folks angry about lost livelihoods, businesses being unable to grieve for lost loved ones. All of that's true. Now, 3 personal values of his that may differ. 1, I support the protesters. I'm with him there. I'm deeply worried protests will fuel outbreaks. So am I. I'm angry we're in a position where there's a tension between racial justice, fighting COVID because we didn't suppress the virus. So I figure Trump put us in this situation. So I'm mad at him for all of it.
That's a fine point, right? I mean, we should have been able to protest safely by now, but we aren't because Trump sucks.
2 takeaways. Remember, you see how we're going from 5, 4, 3, 2?
Oh, yeah.
Right? 2 takeaways. If we had built up a strong testing, tracing infrastructure, we could have been in a very different position, and that would have led us to protest more safely, go back to work more safely, and get kids back to school more safely. And finally, a partridge in a pear tree. I don't want to fight about which kind of death is worse, death from destroyed economy, death from racism, or death from COVID. I really don't.
Okay. You don't have to.
Good. We don't have to. It's all bad. And it would have been a whole lot better if we had just done the right thing earlier. Now we're stuck with catch-up, and it's going to be bad. Now, here is a series of tweets which David can see, but you can't. It's from Charles Fishman, Fishman, who posts on Twitter as C. Fishman. Single coronavirus update snapshot, Florida. Florida got a lot of praise for how it handled nursing home cases. Florida pushed opening amid sneering from people who didn't understand its case spread. And now, the last 4 days, most new cases of any 4 days in the pandemic.
So the sneering, was it
so
right?
So pause and let that sink in a minute. Florida, which avoided the disaster in New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Florida has now had the most new cases in the last 4 days of any 4 days in the whole outbreak. The pandemic is roaring back to life. It's going to be more than one snapshot. So 2 other large states are in big trouble, California and Texas.
But warm weather.
California managed the pandemic as well as any state. Well,
yes,
you know,
that is what they
second
said.
wave. How can you have a second wave when you're not done with the first wave? Today, California is at the highest average number of new cases in the pandemic. Not just the highest, very high. Average new cases today, 2,700. May 8th, 1,700.
Yeah, I've been watching the top
Texas.
10 fluctuates, but
Texas is in the same position as California. The last 5 days have seen the most new cases of any 5 days during the outbreak in Texas. It's at its highest average number of new cases a day so far.
Oh.
When they reopened, it was 800. Now it's 1,600.
That is
And
higher.
3 other states also appear to be in significant coronavirus trouble: Arizona, North Carolina, and South Carolina. North Carolina is where the Republican National Convention will now take place.
Yeah. South Carolina, I haven't seen that much action, but okay.
So that's 6 states that had moderate and well-controlled outbreaks during April and May that are now experiencing rapid increases that could signal community spread. In fact, California and Texas are arguably at their worst point in the pandemic, and they have the most people in the United States.
Wow.
Third largest state,
should have said
and they're in
something.
bad shape.
Yeah. The first couple months of the pandemic was all about focus on New York, and then everybody else focusing on, well, we're not New York. And people said, well, the disease, it travels, it moves, people
Right.
carry
So
it.
maybe the healthcare system and the hospitals are ready, Charles Fishman says. Maybe we've had enough masks now and PPE and respirators. Maybe the economy coming back will balance sickness and death.
Yeah.
But also remember that Redfield at CDC said on April 21st that the fall outbreak could be worse than the spring.
True.
And the spring is bad.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We've done a decent, a job has been done. We'll evaluate it later on getting PPE to most hospitals. Although most of them basically will say, if I'm speaking frankly, if we're going to have another serious spike here, I don't necessarily have enough. And we've procured a bunch of ventilators, although the ventilators haven't done us a great deal of good in most of the places they've been overtaxed. But I haven't seen much action in the way of increasing ICU and general admission bed capacity in the hospitals in these areas. And I guess everybody, I think, regards the expansion of hospital bed capacity in New York as a waste of time or a failure. And so I don't know if anybody is thinking about the necessity for expanding in, whether in California or Texas or elsewhere. And yeah, I don't know. I think until you see hospitals begin to say, that's it, we're topped out, we can't take any more, as we saw developing.
That's what's happening in Arizona now, but that's what happened with Alabama.
Right, and then we Alabama's hospital sort of went into a blackout about that, and I guess that they handled the situation, and that has just been taken as, once again, this panic about exceeding hospital capacity is nonsense, but somebody's going to get it, and somewhere that state is going to be embarrassed to be the one that finally ran out of hospital capacity, this time with like 6 months warning. So we'll wait and see, and watch how people, react to this. Yeah, so like I said, Arizona creeping up in the stats. I've been lately ending the day taking a look at the breakdown by state and looking at who's reporting the most new cases each day. And it's a mix and match bunch, but New York has dropped way down in the standings of new cases reported. And like at the moment, yesterday's roundup was California, Arizona, Virginia, Florida, New York as the top 5.
Well, again, this is not a contest somebody wants to win, but, it's certainly the case that we're far from done with this. Mm-hmm. And while there may be more pressing stories to cover in the news that should be covered, as Dr. Jha was pointing out, all of this stuff has to be balanced, and there's a lot going on. So that's my summary as best I could for a very, very busy weekend. Yes. And we'll be back Wednesday. We'll do it again. I think we're having some more construction work in the house on Wednesday, so I hope to be back. But that's what's going on.
Okay. We will accept that summary. All right, so more work you're going to get done tomorrow when you're not on. Yeah,
and that'll be okay. And then Wednesday we should be done with the loud stuff, I hope. But when you're installing a generator, sometimes power needs to go off, and that's what I need to check on.
It's a long process, this generator.
Oh, yeah. Well, you got to bring the generator.
Whole house.
And then you got to wire the generator in. Right. Then you got to bring a humongous propane tank. I think I sent you a picture. It looks like Yellow Submarine. And then you have to dig a trench connecting the tank with the generator. Then you have to have the trench inspected to make sure it's deep enough. Yes. Then you have to have and that's where we're at right now. We're waiting for the inspector tomorrow. Uh-huh. And then Wednesday is the day the tank gets hooked up to the generator. And then Friday should be the day that the generator gets fired up and we know it works.
Okay.
So it's taken a whole week. And some of that's kind of noisy and some of that's not. But more importantly, for safety reasons,
yes,
and it's all science, kids, you have to turn the electricity off when you're working on this stuff.
Yes. Well, if you're working on your electricity, you want that off. True.
Yeah, something like that. At least the pros are doing it, so they're the ones deciding when it goes on and off, and that's not completely up to me.
Okay.
But, we're getting storms. The climate is changing. That's a huge story we haven't been covering. And we're getting ready for a bad storm season, so hopefully we'll have power and be able to broadcast during the time that the power's out, which happens fairly frequently in these parts.
Right. And it's a good idea if you lose power during the storm seasons to get that, and especially this year, and especially this year when you will want to avoid having to evacuate if you can. Stay home where you're safe and you're familiar in your familiar surroundings and clean and not out circulating among people who might be less careful than you with the coronavirus. My parents are thinking about it down in the Charleston, South Carolina area and saying, they have to evacuate fairly frequently, and sometimes it's a matter of, I don't think the house will be destroyed, but the air conditioning is out, and this is South Carolina, and we can't wait 6-7 days for the power to come back on. It's a good idea to start thinking about, especially as people are asking you to shelter in place, and you're going to have to balance that versus the danger from the hurricane itself. But if it's
By the way, I'm going to leave you with this. This is something maybe you want to go over, maybe you don't. If you don't, maybe we'll do it on Wednesday.
All right.
But James Bennett, the editorial page editor at the New York Times, is out over the whole big flap with Tom Cotton's ridiculous op-ed that never should have gotten to the level of being published, but it was. Katie Kingsbury's the new editor. But along with that, the Times published this absolutely amazing story called Inside the Revolts Erupting in America's Big Newsrooms. Oh. And it has a lot to do with the fact that younger black reporters just aren't putting up with this. The Michelle Cinders of the world, the Wes Lowrys.
Yeah, well.
Craig Melvin, some of the guys that got their start in the Ferguson coverage are not ready to just sit back and say, okay, well, let's just handle this in a completely neutral manner where we're talking about how some of the protests are racialized.
Well, they shouldn't, and it's good news, and it's a good environment, I think, with
and it's a great
Twitter
story. They highlight some of the real stars of reporting here, but also about how older white newsrooms really are having a hard time dealing with them.
Yes, well,
which is why James Bennett is out.
Barry Weiss made it a generational thing the other day. What a brilliant tactical move that was.
Yeah, and also made it all about how open discussion happens on campuses.
Yes, which have been closed for like 3 months, 4 months.
Right.
So okay, whatever.
Right, because if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
I guess so.
That's part of the issue. How long she stays remains to be seen. And of course, the conservatives are acting as like they're the victims.
Sure. Well, there's lots of places to go.
Again.
Yeah. It's always Quillette, as they say.
Yeah.
And I think
every day is Quillette, right?
Yeah. This would be very interesting. Maybe we'll save this one for Wednesday because there'll be a lot to say about it, and I think you'll want to participate in that. And there's plenty to use between now and then, but it is interesting, and I appreciate Twitter in these times when things are unstable for the really good journalists. They're unstable for a lot of reasons, and it seems to me that you're more able to follow the personal brand of the journalist wherever they go and wherever they land, and they
do
take
seem
audience
to be
with
changing
them.
and moving.
Yeah, and I think there's more, there's more mobility. It was the way that they would put it if you were trying to put a rosy hue on it, I suppose. That people are getting fired and having to move a lot, but they're able to take audiences with them and make themselves more attractive properties to other publications through their social media accounts, which I think is very nice. I was about to say it's kind of empowering, and really, it's a good backstop more than being an empowering thing. Nobody likes to be fired and have to move jobs, but it's an interesting addition to the dynamic.
Right, and then finally, the other way you know that Trump is losing is because you're starting to see these stories. One was by Josh Krashour, National Journal, not behind a paywall, and this one is Jonathan Bernstein writing in Bloomberg. What will Republicans look like after Trump? How the party reacts after November will depend a lot on the media, and that's a big problem. That is to say, if Fox News doesn't go away and has a lot of sway, Trump may be gone, but Trumpism might be here.
Been warned by that.
Josh Krashour has a more moderate point of view, saying that after Trump loses, nobody's going to want to listen to him, and all of a sudden people are going to discover they never liked him anyway. But the point is, if those kinds of stories are being written now, he's losing.
Those are post-mortems.
Yes.
He's not mortem yet.
These are pre-mortems, right?
Yeah, right. Oh, that's right.
If you're writing pre-mortems, you're losing.
That's right. Okay, good. He is losing this, and he's a loser.
He's a loser.
So there you go. Some picture of him here, too. I guess the wind is billowing his jacket out. I guess. But he may also just be stress eating in the basement. I don't know.
Anyway, that's the story. Take care, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday.
All right. Very good. We'll do it that way. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it. It is another tough weekend to round up.
Well, a lot happened. And you know what? A lot's going to happen, so we'll be back.
Right, and our permanent weekend of continued shutdown in some of these places.
It's Wednesday already, right?
Yes, and at least it's Friday. So there's always that. And all right, let me roll over here to the... I had mentioned the coronavirus news. I do keep an eye on how things are going in the various states, and I've been looking at the new case numbers, and those aren't necessarily the most clearly illustrative numbers because, of course, the high population states will tend to have the most new cases, and it should be no surprise to anyone that California is at the top of the list for that reason. And so it still may be the case that they have handled the pandemic well in general, but I also think that they got some chaos breaks, I will call them. They got some breaks that New York didn't get, and everybody was trying to nail down scientifically exactly what they were. But one of them, we kept being reminded by Greg, could just have been chaos standing in the way of a larger and more widespread infection, and that maybe California's battle with coronavirus is a longer, more drawn-out, flattened curve. But eventually, if there's the same area under the curve as there was in New York, the numbers are the numbers. It's probably a better situation to draw it out for the hospitals and for increasing in infections, because people aren't able to properly handle the load in the hospitals. But if in the end the numbers add up the same way, I don't know which one, how easy it will be to declare one or the other the great success here. But as it happens, thankfully, the numbers haven't reached New York proportions just yet. So, but just catching up on things, as I mentioned, California, Arizona, Virginia, Florida, New York are top fives in the new cases reported yesterday, according to Worldometers, which is, by the way, I should just point out, it's a little bit difficult to compare to some of the other numbers we see about daily case numbers, because Worldometer, as you might guess, being about the world, is keyed to a different time zone than ours, and so it measures the beginning and end of the day differently, and so we'll so frequently come up with different numbers than we report here. Runs on Greenwich Mean Time, but at any rate, the top 5 states in the country all reporting over 1,000 new cases yesterday, and California well over 2,000. And the second tier doesn't look that much better, to be honest. Maybe we'll discuss it a little bit more after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Thinking about it over the short break, I've been seeing a lot more as I'm trying to find earlier tweets that I had put out about the various counts in the various countries and in the various states, and along the way turning up a lot of buried gems mostly from coronavirus skeptics early on in the pandemic that are just contenders for all-time worst, this tweet aged well awards, including one that I came across the other day where somebody was like, at some point saying, well, there's like less than 50 cases in the country. So, we are overreacting. And of course, we're at, 2 million cases now in the country. Over the weekend, that would be one of the updates. The United States, according to the Worldometers numbers anyway, which are almost always closely followed within a matter of a few days by every other counter. If you are keying your statistics to Johns Hopkins or any of the other New York Times projects or various other tracking projects, it's all pretty close. And I don't think no one really knows. Worldometers has been pretty open and transparent about what their sources are, and they try to source every report that they add to their totals. So I've found them relatively trustworthy, even if the announcement that the United States has recorded its 2 millionth confirmed case of coronavirus, that came over the weekend from Worldometers and will likely be confirmed within, during this week, probably the earlier part of this week, by every other publication or tracker source. But it's been real interesting finding these other hidden gems. And as I've been watching what's been going on in other countries, I came across this tweet not even all that early in the situation, April 17th. A conversation that stemmed from one of my earlier tweets, but carried on after I had, abandoned the conversation. But a guy here, I don't know who he is, Andrew Smalls, but Andrew Smalls 13 tweeting on April 17th, you do realize that half the world is either unwilling or unable to socially distance, don't you? This was during the time when they were still touting Sweden as a possible model for success, but also pointing out that there are other countries where social distancing will be next to impossible because of the size of their populations and the crowding situations in their cities, etc. But at April 17th, his point was, well, these cities have these conditions around the world, and they don't have anything like the pandemic that they should have. If everything you're saying about the contagious nature of this disease is true, you would think that they would be drowning in coronavirus cases. Well, give them time, and they will. So here he says, you realize that half the world is either unwilling or unable to socially distance, don't you? Think of Brazil, Belarus, and Sweden. Well, we know what happened in Sweden, and now we know what happened in Brazil. But on April 17th, it looked like Brazil, it's just not here in South America for the most part. Then think of India, Bangladesh. Can you point to exponentially increasing death rates in those countries? And then he says, I'll smoke while I wait, which is probably not a good idea. And it's unlikely that he ever came back to review the things that he said back then, and I'm sure he has many excuses for what he said there. But it sticks in my mind when I check in on things each day over at the World Demeters, because of course, United States leads the world in total number of cases, as you know, now over 2 million. Will be topping the 113,000 mark in deaths at some point later on today. Brazil standing now at 691,000 cases, and apparently no further interest in counting anymore. So that's really interesting. We'll see whether they continue to rack up numbers or whether they really are going to cut off the data, just as they were poised to be the second country in the world to top 700,000 cases. Russia, we've always suspected that they're reporting as a little suspect, just like China, at 476,000 cases, and I guess I would expect to see them topping 500,000 cases sometime this week. Spain, still increasing their numbers, though certainly flattening their curve. UK coming up close behind them, and I would say you might see those numbers flip this week too, with the UK becoming the fourth highest total number of cases in the world and replacing Spain. And really hot on their heels, hey, you'll never believe it, India, which passed Italy in the total number of infections a few days ago, I guess. That one, of course, doesn't tell us a great deal because the populations of Italy and India are so incongruous that you would expect that even at a much lower infection rate, India would surpass Italy. And that is what happened. And let's see, how are they doing for cases per 1 million in population? Yeah, no contest there. Italy at 3,886 cases per million in population. India, allegedly anyway, only at 187 cases per million. That's enough to put them ahead of Italy because, of course, they're dealing with a population of 1.3 billion. So very difficult to keep the numbers down there. But just by way of running through them so that you know how things stand, again, USA, Brazil, Russia, Spain, UK, India, Italy. That's 7 nations in the 200,000 plus club, I guess if you want to call it that. I'm sure that they don't. Rounding out the 6 figures club, of course we're in 7 figures, but rounding out the 6 figures club with over 100,000 cases, Peru, Germany, Iran, one of the early hotspots, Turkey, also an early hotspot that we didn't hear very much about in the time since, then France, then Chile, Mexico, a fairly new entrant there, and the newest ones over the weekend, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Pakistan, you would imagine, would climb up the ranks alongside Italy. But what about Sweden and Belarus? What do we remember about them? We haven't seen much action in terms of total number of cases. It doesn't put them up in the 6 figures club, but Sweden still holding its own, I guess, in the top 25 around the world, and certainly way ahead of its northern neighbors, and among some of the infection rate, the per cases per millions of population, among the leaders in Europe. Bangladesh, though, was also mentioned in this. They stand at number 20. I told you about Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, rounding out the 100,000, the six-figure club. And close on their heels, also expected, I think, to cross over into the six-figure club probably by the end of the week, if not sooner, Canada, our neighbors to the north. Welcome to our Canadian friends to, I'm sorry, but eventually being next to the United States with its 2 million cases. This was going to happen. And so it has. You've managed to keep your death rate relatively under control, so that's good news, and that probably has a lot to do with your healthcare system. But Canada a few days ago now surpassed the numbers, suspect as they may be, from China in terms of total numbers of cases. Following China and still rising, Qatar, which stands at the top of the world at this point in per capita cases per millions in population. I might as well just throw that number out for you here. Where's the cases per million? 24,987 cases for every million. They're at something in the neighborhood of over 2% of the entire population now infected. But by the way, so that puts them at the top. They're the most infected nation there is by population, or by per capita, I guess. Since Trump doesn't understand that, we'll tease him with that again. Most infected nation on Earth per capita. And for those people hoping to make it to herd immunity quickly, only 2% of their population is infected. They've got a long way to go, and we've got a long way to go around the world to get to any sort of herd immunity without a vaccine. That's, on the one hand, bad news for herd immunity fans who said, well, it's bad news to have to get there, but if we're going to get there, we might as well just do it, which wasn't a great approach. But also, I guess, good news for those of us who worried for whatever reason or interpreted the data to mean that this thing was going to move like lightning around the world. But the fact that it's moving relatively slowly, good for hospitals, bad for us in terms of getting out from underneath this thing. It's not going to burn out anytime soon. So Qatar was number 19, Bangladesh number 20, 68,000 cases among their sizable population of 164 million. Belgium, one of the hardest hit in terms of death toll, just didn't handle things well in Europe, at number 21. And then Belarus, number 22. By the way, South Africa has kind of crept up the rankings too and made a bid for tops in their continent, I guess. Netherlands and then Sweden rounding out the top 25. Sweden having edged out Ecuador, which we heard about in April as one of the hardest hit in terms of unpreparedness for the virus and having people dying at home and leaving corpses in the street, essentially, unable to deal with the volume of death there. And I guess basically what that tells you is that this guy's predictions on April 17th that those countries wouldn't register, and because they didn't and never would, because they didn't then, they never would, and because they never would, the whole thing was a hoax, and I guess it just hasn't worked out, is all what I'm trying to say here. I also circulate charts, like I said, on total cases by million and total deaths by millions of population, and those charts give you a slightly different look. Total cases that will tell you about the infection rates here. Like I have said, Qatar exceeding now the statistical anomalies of the microstates. Qatar is a small place, geographically, but 2.8 million in population. It's not tiny, but they have topped the places, like I said, that are, because of their microstate status, are going to be statistical anomalies. The rest of the top 5 are San Marino, Vatican City, Andorra, and then the not quite as micro Bahrain, 1.6 million in population. But that just points out, if you take the microstates out of the equation, Qatar and Bahrain and Kuwait are the top 3 most infected per capita in the world. And I don't know exactly how that happened. And I don't know that anybody had any eyes on it, except, I guess, for us, because I haven't seen much discussion of it, that the Persian Gulf is now a real hotbed of high infection rates. And I suspect, as some of you have commented to me on Twitter and an email, that it has to do with the labor situation there. They use a lot of imported near slave conditions, in some cases, labor for their wild construction booms fueled by oil. And they don't take particularly good care of the people there, and they live in overcrowded, difficult conditions with a lack of access to medical care. And I guess it's a place that would be ripe for an outbreak, and I guess it is. I don't know that the elite of Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait are suffering from infections of coronavirus, but I'm not positive. But there you have it. By the way, in terms of total cases per million, also not that far down. We're 12th on the list, and have passed a new threshold of now over 6,000 total cases per 1 million in population. And it's been kind of amazing to watch that happen. Let's see. Belarus comes in at 15 on that list. Sweden on 20, number 20 on that list. You get the idea here. And in deaths per million, slightly different picture. San Marino still up at the top of that. They really fared badly very early on, when they really didn't know how to handle things, and a lot of people died. But then Belgium, Andorra again. Number 4 on the list now in terms of deaths per million is the UK. So again, take out the real microstates of San Marino and Andorra. You got Belgium and UK, then Spain, Italy, and then what? Sweden out of nowhere. So how is Sweden doing over there? I'd say not that well. And then UK, which had initial plans, even though the Swedes deny that they were going for herd immunity. They now admit that was a mistake, and to the extent that anybody said that was their goal, they don't even acknowledge that. UK also flirted with that briefly, and not really working out for them. And also, so between these 3 categories of new cases, tops and new cases by day, and and have we even done that? The new cases per day globally. United States topping the list yesterday, although Brazil had topped the list the day before, and we switch positions from time to time. So new cases as of yesterday, tops in the world: USA, Brazil, India, Russia, Chile, Pakistan, Peru, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Bangladesh for your top 10. And so for those people who thought Bangladesh and Belarus, maybe the guy had a point after all, because you don't hear much about them. Bangladesh now creeping up into the top 10. Belarus standing at number 19 in that case, just behind Turkey and just before Oman. What do you know? Another Persian Gulf state. So I'd say keep an eye on the Persian Gulf for this one. And here at home in the United States, things moving and people switching positions in the top 10 states for new cases per day, with some of the earlier hardest hit states still in the tops, like New York, and occasionally You'll see New Jersey or Connecticut bounce in and out of there, but now it's sort of moving down the Atlantic seaboard. Maryland and Virginia are in there day after day. Texas and Arizona, as we mentioned, in there day after day. So, not going anywhere. Worth keeping an eye on. And it intersects with the protests in all of the obvious ways. Let me at least note for the record here, I'll take the Hill's report on this because of the way Twitter works for me. Brazil stops publishing coronavirus death total. Zach Berdrick reports for the Hill. We'll see where they get their report through the AP here. Brazilian officials have stopped publishing data on total coronavirus fatalities, anyway, in South America's largest country after official numbers showed the third highest death toll in the world. And I guess that's embarrassing to them. And that, too, is a point that a lot of people have been commenting on, that all of a sudden, oddly enough, at the top of these lists, there are 4 very large countries and some smaller countries, if you expand the number beyond 4, that are controlled by authoritarian wackos these days. Tops in the lists for mishandling the virus by most metrics are the United States and Brazil and India and UK. UK not quite I don't think as bad in terms of autocratic rule. That Boris Johnson hasn't been able to ruin their country as quickly as Donald Trump has ruined ours. But people are taking notice of that. And, of course, Russia also at the top of these lists as well. And golly, the likelihood of continuing to get or ever getting accurate numbers out of this group is decreasing by the day, which only makes the situation more worrisome. Brazil's Federal Health Ministry on Friday removed a website displaying the daily, weekly, and monthly total of infections and deaths by state, according to the AP, which added that the site has since been restored, but now only displays totals for the previous 24 hours. So there's still some data of some kind coming out here. When total numbers were last published, they showed 34,000 deaths in the country and nearly 615,000 total cases, the AP noted. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, who has minimized the threat of the virus throughout the pandemic, tweeted Saturday that 24-hour totals would allow the government to follow the reality of the country at this moment. Carlos, this is what it says. His last name is Wizard, which I imagine is Wizard there, but that's kind of funny by itself, and I'm not certain what kind of, where does that come from? That's interesting. So Carlos, what we would say Carlos Wizard, that's funny enough for me. A businessman and ally of Bolsonaro's who is likely to be appointed to a health ministry post. That's interesting. So another wizard in the ministry for those of you following the Harry Potter saga. Oh, and that's a whole other story, but we'll get to that some other day, I think. Told the newspaper O Globo that earlier numbers were fanciful or manipulated and that the federal government planned to conduct a review to get a more accurate number. And I don't know whether he really means that or he means that, like, wink, wink, authoritarian, more accurate. Guess what? We've defeated the coronavirus, and there's 15 cases going down to 0. Whether that's going to be their new story. All right. Just keeping an eye on how they're trying to handle things in Brazil, whether even if that means just giving up entirely. A new study cited in a Washington Post piece circulated this morning tells us more or less the obvious. Shutdowns prevented, in this case, now they're pegging it at 60 million coronavirus infections in the U.S., according to this study. A couple other angles on the numbers here. This piece by Joel Achenbach saying that shutdown orders prevented about 60 million infections in the U.S. and 285 million in China, according to a research study published today, Monday, that examined how stay-at-home orders and other restrictions limited the spread of the contagion. A separate study from epidemiologists at Imperial College London, that's all they do there, I guess, estimated that shutdowns saved about 3.1 million lives in 11 European countries, including 500,000 in the UK, and dropped infection rates by an average of 82%, sufficient to drive the contagion well below epidemic levels. So that's the good news. We're still dealing with something that we don't have any effective treatment for and no vaccine for. And to the extent it begins to seep around the walls and through the seams, we will continue to see it spread, and it will continue as a danger, and we should continue working with health authorities to mask up and wash up and pay attention to things. But yes, it certainly could have been much, much worse. But there, I guess, no news story, just some interesting additional numbers and additional ways of thinking about how valuable the shutdown time was. Not that that's going to change any minds among the people who are out protesting, besides which they're now distracted. They now are going to be out with their guns protesting other people's right to protest. They're going to be very busy. Let's see. Where else to go? Oh, you know what? This is something we're going to have to pay attention to, although this will take us probably through the break. So maybe I can wait for that for the other side of the break, and we can hit some of the other smaller stories. Here's a bizarre one to really switch gears. Something from Politico that I happened to spot over the weekend. Hard to explain. Josh Gerstein writes this headline for us: Feds press criminal case against Flynn partner. The move occurs even amid ongoing efforts to drop charges against Michael Flynn. This is very odd. And, it would be tough to explain in a country with their actual, honest-to-God justice system. But it's easy to explain here in our grift system. The Justice Department is pressing forward with its criminal case against a former business partner of Michael Flynn, despite Attorney General William Barr's controversial decision to seek to abandon the prosecution of the former National Security Advisor to President Donald Trump. Prosecutors seeking to revive the convictions of Flynn's former colleague, Bijan Rafiekian, we'll say maybe, Rafiekian, Rafiekian, filed a brief with a federal appeals court Sunday, which they really should have been relaxing and enjoying a day off, or perhaps joining in protest. The filing makes several mentions of Flynn's integral role in the work that led to the 2 foreign agent-related felony charges against Rafiekian, and maintains the government's position that Flynn was a co-conspirator in his business partner's crimes. A curious stance, as the government seeks to drop the criminal case it brought against Flynn more than 2 years ago. So he was a co-conspirator with this guy who they're going to throw the book at, but that's okay, essentially, is all they have to say, because he's one of us. The 53-page brief filed with the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond makes no mention of the Justice Department's extraordinary decision to jettison the case Special Counsel Robert Mueller's office brought in December of 2017 as part of a plea deal with the former Defense Intelligence Agency chief and key foreign policy advisor to Trump's 2016 presidential bid. While that case focused on Flynn's statements to the FBI in January 2017 about his dealings with the Russian ambassador, it also included an admission by Flynn that he signed off on inaccurate Foreign Agent Registration Act filings, FARA Act filings, about the project that led to Rafiekian's prosecution, a $600,000 contract Flynn signed for Flynn Intel Group at the height of the presidential campaign in 2016 to lobby on behalf of a Dutch firm, Innovo BV. We'll learn a little bit about them at this point, I guess, and see if we can't figure out exactly what's going on. But note again for the record here, Rafiekian's case goes forward for his role in a problematic and illegal, I guess, contract situation for the Flynn Intel Group. What's happening with Flynn? Flynn gets to walk, I guess. How odd. Prosecutors found that Innovo was actually a front for nothing Dutch at all, rather the Turkish government, and that lobbying and messaging campaigns that Flynn and Rafiekian had no real business element, but was aimed at a prominent opponent of the Turkish government, that troublesome cleric, Fethullah Gulen. All right, well, I guess for those of you who were following along with the story and said, what Belgium. Or Dutch firm, sorry. A Dutch firm. How did that even get in there? I thought the whole thing was about Turkey. Well, it comes back around to Turkey. So anyway, that's where we stand with that case. Everybody else involved in that case is a no-good Nick and a criminal and has to be sentenced immediately. And Flynn apparently had nothing to do with the Flynn Intel Group and the way they signed their contracts and reported the activities of their personnel under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. How curious. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Roots Radio. Let's see, where else to go here? There's so many different directions to go, but let's switch subjects and just say, look, the Flynn case is kind of an effed up situation, and we're keeping an eye on it the best we can in the flood of news going on. But more closely related to the activities of the weekend, the discussions of the weekend, a subject we probably have to open up and discuss a little bit about. Washington Post piece serves as a good entry point on that from Christy Lopez. The headline, "Defund the Police." Here's what that really means, and I don't know whether that's what everybody really means when they say it, and lots of people say different things, but I've seen a lot of fretting over the weekend and even prior to the weekend and now throughout and extending into this weekend. Probably maybe even a lot of you listening have the same concern. Look, we all have concerns, so it doesn't surprise me this comes up, but I saw a lot of pushback over the weekend. Not that I was out there pushing the defund the police or anything else the police narrative necessarily. Certainly not. There are more people taking more aggressive stances on it than I am, that's for sure. But I'm following it with some interest. But I've seen defund the police. I've seen reform the police. I've seen abolish the police. I've seen, we always see F the police. That always happens too. But the pushback that I've seen, that I've bothered to deal with, has been fretting essentially like, well, don't say that. I don't say it, but don't say that. And the people who do say that, you're going to get us in trouble. They're going to use it against us. And it's an open invitation to Trump to use it against Biden. And of course, they're rightly concerned with anything that makes it look, at all like Trump might be able to finagle his way into a second term. And, I take all such concerns seriously, at least briefly, because I don't want that to happen either. However, I am reminded from time to time, well, people spent an awful lot of time and energy, and they meant it, in spreading the meme of abolishing ICE. And as I say sarcastically, when I get fed up with the whole thing about the pushback and say, well, everybody remembers how we lost all the 2018 elections because some people said they wanted to abolish ICE. Well, I remember when we all died when somebody tweeted abolish ICE. It didn't really become a factor. And although this may be a hotter flashpoint and more people paying more attention to what's going on here, I also think that there's a lot of room for people to interpret what it might mean and what people might mean by this thing, and that there might be some serious policy proposals behind it as well that deserve examination. But my chief issue has been, well, don't worry too much about what gets said on Twitter, particularly when people say to me, don't go around saying abolish the police, which is not something I usually go around saying, but don't go around saying that, or don't go around defending people who do say it, because Twitter's not real life. And out there in the real world where people vote, and it's always worth thinking about what it's like out there in the real world where people vote versus in our bubbles, whether they be online elsewhere or on Twitter or in our show, what have you. You want to keep, up to date on these things and be realistic about them. But if at the same time that Twitter's not real life and therefore don't say those things, you should also realize, well, again, Twitter's not real life. So if people say it on Twitter, it's not really going to have that big of an impact on things out there in the real life world. Well, anyway, there's also room for debating what do the people mean, though not all people will mean the same thing. Here's an attempt to jump into the debate. Defund the police. Here's what that really means. And, I bet there are some people who think that it means something else too. And so it's a little bit arrogant, but whatever. We'll give Christy Lopez a crack at it here. She's a professor at Georgetown Law School and co-director of the school's innovative policing program. So one of the very many people who've actually given some thought to serious police reform, which, by the way, will sometimes take the form of disbanding the police or a particular police department with the idea of restarting it with new personnel, which is not necessarily the same thing as abolish or defund the police. But let's see what she has to say here. Since George Floyd's death, a long simmering movement for police abolition, and it's linked here, so I guess you can see exactly who's responsible for this outrage. Long simmering movement for police abolition has become part of the national conversation, recast slightly as a call to defund the police. For activists, this conversation is long overdue, but for casual observers, this new direction may seem a bit disorienting or even alarming. Be not afraid. Christy Lopez says it. You got to believe it. Be not afraid. Defunding the police is not as scary or even as radical as it sounds, and engaging on this topic is necessary if we are going to achieve the kind of public safety we need. I did see an interesting comment the other day via Twitter that somebody was just saying, defund the police sounds extraordinarily radical until you realize we've been defunding education for decades. And I guess that's a good point. But we have this strange attachment to our police that's built up a mythology around them, and oddly in ways that we haven't bothered to build up a mythology about education, which is troubling and maybe a bad idea in general. But anyway, be not afraid. We'll continue on here. During my 25 years dedicated to police reform, including in such places as Ferguson, Missouri, New Orleans, and Chicago, it has become clear to me that reform is not enough. Making sure that police follow the rule of law is not enough. Even changing the laws is not enough. To fix policing, we must first recognize how much we have come to over-rely on law enforcement. We turn to the police in situations where years of experience and common sense tell us that their involvement is unnecessary and can make things worse. We ask police to take accident reports, respond to people who have overdosed, and arrest rather than cite people who have intentionally or not passed a counterfeit $20 bill. Now we're talking about George Floyd's particular situation. We call police to roust homeless people from corners and doorsteps, resolve verbal squabbles between family members and strangers alike, and arrest children for behavior that once would have been handled as a school disciplinary issue. That's a big problem too. Police themselves often complain about having to do too much, including handling social problems for which they are ill-equipped. Some have been vocal about the need to decriminalize social problems and take police out of the equation. It is clear that we must reimagine the role they play in public safety. Defunding and abolition probably means something different from what you're thinking. So we're going to assume that. Maybe it does. We'll find out. For most proponents, defunding the police does not mean zeroing out budgets for public safety, and police abolition does not mean that police will disappear overnight, or perhaps ever. Defunding the police means shrinking the scope of police responsibilities and shifting most of what government does to keep us safe to entities that are better equipped to meet that need. Right? You can even spend the same amount of money, you just spend it differently and on different personnel. It's not a bad idea. It means investing more in mental health care and housing, and expanding the use of community mediation and violence interruption programs. Police abolition means reducing, with the vision of eventually eliminating, our reliance on policing to secure our public safety. It means recognizing that criminalizing addiction and poverty, making 10 million arrests per year and mass incarceration, have not provided the public safety we want and never will. The abolition language is important because it reminds us that policing has been the primary vehicle for using violence to perpetuate the unjustified white control over bodies and lives of black people. That has been with us since slavery. That aspect of policing must literally be abolished. Even as we try to shift resources from policing to programs that will better promote fairness and public safety, we must continue the work of police reform. We cannot stop regulating police conduct now because we hope someday to reduce or eliminate our reliance on policing. We must ban chokeholds and curb the use of no-knock warrants. I'll just pause here for a second and say, as somebody else pointed out, this is a very frequently invoked call here, banning chokeholds, because, of course, it's dangerous and it leads to a lot of deaths. But somebody had pointed out, New York City banned chokeholds by its police years ago, and in fact years before Eric Garner was killed. So it doesn't necessarily solve the problem, because we've banned them before, and then cops are like, oh, I didn't hear that it was banned, or it doesn't matter to me. You can take it up with the judge. In the meantime, I'm going to choke you, and that's that. You can sue me about it later. So banning things doesn't necessarily do the trick either. Anyway, they also mentioned no-knock warrants, another big problem. That largely driven by the war on drugs, essentially. And since if we can take a different approach to that, we may reduce our reliance on no-knock warrants. We must train officers how to better respond to people in mental health crises, and we must teach officers to be guardians, not warriors, to intervene to prevent misconduct, and to understand and appreciate the communities they serve. And if it turns out that that's not what people who are cops now want to do with their lives, so be it. Let them find something else, hopefully legal. If it's, I don't know what you're gonna. What do you do with a bunch of head knockers who got into the business to crack bones? And I don't know, but who cares? Essentially, they want people who are going to do the job we need done. What's wrong with that? I thought that was a conservative, business-like approach to things. Now, why must we work on parallel tracks? She asks. First, all police will not be defunded or abolished anytime soon, and we cannot wait to make changes that will save lives and reduce policing harm now. Experienced advocates know this. This is why, for example, Campaign Zero just launched the hashtag 8Can'tWait campaign, which urges law enforcement agencies to immediately adopt 8 use of force reforms, even as it continues its divest/invest strategy to end police killings. So, yes, there's actually a campaign out there that has done a tremendous amount of thinking about police reform and everything that falls under the category, perhaps, of what people are saying in shorthand, defund the police, and all that work was casually dismissed, as we discussed, by some of the journalists, waving it off as impossible or ill-advised politically last week. More fundamentally, we must continue with reforms because abolition doesn't go far enough. Policing didn't invent America's institutionalized racism, social inequity, or stereotyped masculinity. Policing harms are a product of these broader pathologies. If we were to get rid of policing tomorrow, those pathologies would remain. and they would continue to be deadly. Race bias in our healthcare system has likely killed far more African Americans and, again, the problematic term, Latinx, via COVID-19 than the police have this year. Did I ruin the flow of that sentence for you? Race bias in healthcare systems has likely killed far more, let's say, people of color via COVID-19 than the police have this year. Successful police reforms help us learn how to identify and mitigate the harms of these structural features, even as we work to remake them. In this moment, we have a chance to make not just policing, but our entire country fairer and safer. We must think creatively and educate ourselves. We must ask hard questions and demand answers about public safety budgets. We should have unflinching debates about when, where, and how to seek police reforms instead of defunding, but we should move forward on both tracks so that we can save lives even as we transform the police. So an interesting perspective and a good explanation, whatever. If it's not Vox, you can't call it an explainer, right? Of just what people might mean about those things in a sensible way of approaching it. And again, I would urge you not to cower in fear at the notion that something drastic perhaps might be done. But there's lots of models from around the world for how you could approach even basic policing functions as we would still define them without over-reliance on violence. And of course, certainly we have been able to do it for years, even in this country, without over-reliance on technology and heavy weaponry and militarized weaponry. We've gone way too far over the edge with the militarization of police. So everything that the founders feared about standing armies could just easily be transferred onto the police, as they are now equipped as though they were standing armies and are not clearly accountable to civilian control in many cases. All right. I keep hinting, by the way, and there's so much news that isn't going to fit anyway. We might as well just say, all right, well, look, we'll be continuing to read through all of these items we pulled aside, thinking about talking about them on Monday, knowing we wouldn't get to them until Tuesday, and we can go back to this item that I keep hinting at, and I hinted at last Friday, and then I think I forgot to put it in the roundup. But the problematic, in a way, not generally and totally problematic, but the particular problem that we have with dealing with the term Latinx. And that is to say it's difficult to pronounce and to understand. And although I think we've all grasped the concept behind it, maybe there's something that would be maybe easier to say and be more representative of the community we're referring to anyway. And I keep saying, I've seen a good suggestion from one of our friends and listeners, and then I have been unable to share it. So why don't I just intentionally turn toward it now? Let's see. I have it actually most readily available on my phone. But the problem with Latinx is you may know him via the Daily Coast community. How do you even? I've never had to pronounce your name out loud here. Treblegonica. I've never had to do it. I just recognize it by sight. Now, who do I say that name to? But we also hear from him quite often in email and through Twitter. And I think he actually uses the same handle on Twitter, but then he puts his own name in instead. And so we refer to Gil all the time in his messaging. But I'm not certain that he wants necessarily the whole name, even though he sometimes uses it on Twitter, read aloud and discussed. But, Gil is certainly a lot easier to say. It's funny, some of the things that I recognize instantly by sight, but I've never actually had to try and work out the pronunciation of. But in case you're looking for it, the problem with Latinx is written here again, the username. I'll spell it out for you if you want to find it. T-R-E-B, Trebly, right? Ligon I-Q-U-A. Oof, boy. And, once you pronounce it for me, and you probably give me the pronunciation in email, and I'll say, that was startlingly easy. Why couldn't I see it? But when you put yourself on the spot in front of the microphone, things go kablooey sometimes. Let's get to the actual thing here. Sorry, he says, for the clickbaitish headline. I'm sorry for bumping into the microphone there. But I just needed to say something, and it's about the word Latinx. And this, by the way, this is long-standing out there. It's been out there for a while. October 8th, 2019. All this time I've been saying we should really get to that. So that's why it's important. And he starts out by saying, I'm Latinx, whatever that may be, right? I'm Latinx, Puerto Rican by culture, both parents, but born in mainland United States. And I've lived here all my life. I've heard Spanish throughout. And despite that, I have struggled to understand what the rules of gender are in Spanish. And, rules of gender are changing everywhere. That's part of the problem, I guess. Or part of the difficulty anyway, if not problem. Why do some words get the article la and some el in Spanish? English has its many faults, but assigning gender to inanimate objects for the most part is not one of them. As a child, it felt frustrating. When I became an adult and finally came to accept my status as a gay man, I became aware of the plight of my trans, fluid, and non-binary fellow Q plus persons in negotiating this minefield. And do I read that out correctly? I mean, it's a Q and a plus, but that's not something I deal with every day either. And is there a different way of reading that out? Or have I got it right? I don't run into that a lot. But, I don't spend the same amount of time on the subject. But okay, well, learn something every day, or you discover what you haven't learned yet. Anyway, I don't know that I actually learn the things each day, but I do learn that I haven't learned some things. And then I don't always make up for it by learning it. But okay. It got me thinking, we continue, why do we even have gendered pronouns? That is a weird question to ponder, right? Does it really aid at all in language, whether English or Spanish? We don't have distinct pronouns for race or age or any other characteristic that I can think of. I think they is great as a singular. And it's incorrect, but I like it too. They is great as a singular, and when someone asks, what's your pronoun, I feel good. I remember when first learning English grammar that he was supposedly okay to use when you don't know the gender. I remember watching Star Trek The Next Generation as a kid, and Picard saying, who is he? When talking about an unknown alien who turned out to be a female, and thinking, well, it's proper grammar, I suppose, but isn't this the future? Haven't we evolved beyond that? When I became a fan of Pokemon, boy, this is going everywhere, I started to notice that people used the term he for all the species that didn't have obvious feminine characteristics, and then saw that for most real animals, he is used when it would be the more reasonable pronoun. Oddly enough, cats seem to be an exception, as a lot of people assume she for whatever reason. Well, maybe. It was also annoying, and not having clear rules about these things can be annoying. A few years ago, I finally put the two and two together. Latino is a gendered term. It's super obvious. And since I suffer from anxiety, it started to stress me out. I'm sorry. I recently had come to understand that a female-associated word that happened to include me, like when told, have a good night, ladies, should only bother me if I'm offended by the idea of being a woman. So I was like, we should just go by Latinas. How silly of me, not going to happen. And I thought about how so many languages use gender. What can be done? And while this was happening, I first encountered the word Latinx. My first thought, a gender-neutral word for Latinas and Latinos. Cool. But then I tried to say it. Latinx? Latinx? How do you pronounce this? How do you pronounce anything? I always have this problem. It was very annoying. Spanish is great in that you can pretty much assume pronunciation of words if you know the alphabet and know the rule for accents and stressing the penultimate syllable. I definitely found Spanish pronunciation a lot easier, and there are a lot fewer hidden tricks that you just have to learn by knowing the language and using it every day. You can pretty much work your way through anything, except if it's someone's screen name. Anyway, what was the X doing there? The letter X, which is X in Spanish, isn't really used very much, and it certainly wouldn't be at the end of a word, at least not without an E before it. The more I thought about it, the more imposed it felt. And by the way, yes, an E, an English E, I guess A in Spanish, which would just be confusing for those who don't know Spanish and say, wait, well, was it E or an A? Yeah, well, you get it. The English E would come before the X. So he continues, the more I thought about it, the more imposed it felt. Like the white Americans had decided to be woke and create a gender-neutral term for my people. And I don't know what the actual origins are, but that sounds as likely as anything. I don't think that it was necessarily the case, as my understanding is that it came out of a need for Q plus people of our heritage to have a neutral term. But whoever coined it was seemingly not considering the language family pronunciation. To me, the English X denotes a strike, an error, perhaps even nothingness. This is not who we Latinas and Latinos are. I get it's meant to mean unknown, but why does the gringo get to determine who we are? Oh. I spent some time thinking about this, and I have a solution. It's super arrogant of me, but I am hoping to coin a new term. Since we progressives are pretty much the only people who care, maybe we can start to spread it at Daily Kos. Here's my idea. Latines. That would be L-A-T-I-N-Y, with N with the tilde over it, for those of you not quite as familiar. E-S. L-A-T-I-N-Y-E-S. Latines. My thinking is it conforms with the rules of Spanish. It has the genderless E instead of the feminine A and the masculine O. More importantly, it has the Ny, a letter that does not exist in English. For non-Spanish speakers, the letter Ny, and it just shows it there, is pronounced like an N followed by a Y. It embraces its Spanish nature. That's the point of his using it there instead of the X. And for my fellow Brazilian fellow Latines with an HES at the end in Portuguese could work as a Portuguese version if my understanding of Portuguese pronunciation is correct. Anyway, so what do you say? Want to spread the word? I don't need credit, and that's good because then you won't have to pronounce his screen name out loud. But okay, I don't need credit. I just want to be true to my people, both queer and Latine. And I don't want to sound like a rejected X-Man villain. P.S. Can we dispose of Mr. and Ms. in the New York Times? Well, that might be a tall order to get them to follow suit. But I know that was something of a departure from the news, but it keeps coming up, and I keep saying that it's important and we should do our part in spreading it. So I wanted to get it out there. So I give some extra valuable Monday real estate or time or however you want to measure this thing to it because it's important, and I've been putting it off for far too long, and we keep running into it, and now's as good a time as any. All right, coming up to the end of the show here, and the warning goes off for getting ready for our outro music here, and of course that means it will be time soon to hand the microphone over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Is there anything else on an emergency basis that I think we got to throw in there? And probably there is. And let me see if I can find it. Well, we won't be able to fit that one in there. Probably so many good tweets that made it into Pocket over the weekend, but just didn't get discussed here. I guess I'll throw in one more note just before the music comes up. Saw a report in USA Today, which I obviously won't have time to read, but just thought I should point out, since we spent so much time on the coronavirus outbreaks climb at U.S. meatpacking plants. Oh, goodness. Of course, a pop-up is going to get in the way of my actually reading the thing. And there it is. Coronavirus outbreaks climb at U.S. meatpacking plants despite protections Trump's order to keep them open, but something in the neighborhood of like some incredible number of now sticking in my head now, I doubt myself, something like 20,000 cases traced to meatpacking plants and the communities around them. It's really rather amazing, and it occurs to me that for all the American conservatives who want to blame this on China and say, close China's wet markets. We have our own wet markets. They're the meatpacking plants, and they're responsible now for tens of thousands of infections, and who knows what that might pass on to us through the food chain, or what shortages might arise if we just don't have enough people to do the work because we're not taking it seriously enough. Just wanted to point that out as I hand things over to Justice for his show, and he'll no doubt touch on all the things that we missed on today, including, let's see, some fun stuff like our 70 Zuckerberg-funded scientists and researchers wrote the Facebook CEO that Trump should not use the social media platform to spread information and incendiary statements.
On netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waltman.
Yes, and on the subject of disbanding and perhaps defunding the police departments, the Minneapolis City Council will, I guess, take the lead on this, as the majority of the City Council supports disbanding the department and, I guess, starting over, so we can look to them for some leadership and a live example of how this might be done.